Great to meet you, Manchán. I'm so happy that we're discussing your book. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a good way to sort of bring together a lot of the amazing content that was talked about today. If people haven't seen it, oh, good, it's on the screen, great. I really urge you to read this wonderful book. It's just so vivid. It has such a great wealth of Irish vocabulary and the context of that vocabulary, and great translations into English. And for me, reading it, I really felt that you made that connection between the Irish landscape and the human knowledge about that landscape through the power of the language itself. And I feel like that is something that people are hungry for. So such a beautiful book. With my job at Living Tongues, I spent a lot of time editing and organizing lexicons for endangered languages. So that's through that role, I come across a lot of really unique vocabulary. And so I appreciated your book on that level too. There's so many cool words in there, like for example, the Irish word for sun inspiration, which means blisters caused by the sun on certain leaves, on leaves of certain herbs that when eaten give the gift of poetry. I was like,
exactly.
Can you say it again?
Umuscrena.
Oh, that one is just so beautiful. And there are so many interesting, vivid words like that. Like there's the word for a reaper's handful of corn cut with a sickle and simultaneously gathered in the left hand.
Luchter was that. Yeah.
That's such a great one. I was wondering if you could read from near the beginning of the book where you talk about some of the Irish words for field.
Yeah.
So that people could hear that topic.
Okay. So it goes, so this is, I think my grandmother was telling me words for field. And so Gower is a field of corn grass. Bjorach is a marshy field. Bronner is a fallow field. Quiveren is a tilled field worked in partnerships with a neighbour. Tour, a night field for cattle. Cloyne is a meadow field between two woods. Townach, an arable field in an arid area. Readlin is a field for games or dancing. Plas, a level field for spreading flax or hay. Plasog, a sheltered field in which a mare would foal. Rain is an upland field. Machara, a low-lying field. Boile is a field for keeping cattle before milking, as we heard from Sean McAtee just earlier there, where he was going, the trading was another word for, I think, the boile. Monair is an enclosed field. Raig is a level field. Mean is a smooth, fine field. Railog is an unenclosed patch of good land in the middle of a craig, which is a stonier area of limestone. Caireen is a field with a fairy dwelling in it. Lussud is a neat, well-arranged field. It's similar to Coolin, which is also small, which is also neat but smaller. And it goes on and go on. Like in my Gaeltacht, the main word would be gurt, but up other places in Connemara, it would be park. And gurt is a name for a field, but actually it's a very specific thing. It's a field that's capable of being ploughed by one horse team and one person between dawn and dusk, or by a team between dawn and dusk. So they're very, very specific from what we now just have field.
That's amazing. And see, so much of that knowledge could be lost, right, over time, since a lot of people are living in more urban areas or, different parts of the world, and they still connect to their Irish heritage, but they don't necessarily have that whole dimension of the agricultural life that goes along with it, that depth of vocabulary that goes along with it. And it made me think too, like, so much of that knowledge and experience that's been lost, it's actually so, it was vividly portrayed in like the previous panel, where the speaker was where Sean was talking about conceptions of the night sky, and all of that, a lot of that older, those traditional agricultural and cattle raising experiences are reflected in the vocabulary for the night sky. So I thought that was just so beautiful too. And I really encourage for all of you just tuning in now, definitely read 32 Words for Field. Could you tell us how you went about how you collected some of this amazing vocabulary over time?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of links today. Like first, with Sean McAteague, those words he gave into the stars, they've never been said aloud before. They've never been collected. Like this is sort of it's amazing that the Irish Arts Centre is going and reaching out these things, but it's something that's happening in the last few years. So at one point, Sean showed a photo of where he was from Dún Queen, looking out over Groig Strand, and said there was a name for every field. And we know that probably all over the world there was a name for every field, and yet that was almost lost in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But I know in Ireland, at least, only in the last 4 or 5 years, people are going back and they're asking their old people for the names, they're writing them down. And again, there's an amazing website. Well, Una mentioned it, duchas.ie, but they have a connected website, luganum.ie, the place names website. And there's a thing called Mehel Luganum. So anyone in the country can put down their names, their fields. So I'm lucky, like I am not a native speaker. We spent a lot of time in West Kerry, Kirkcaldy, where Una Ming's relations are from and where Sean McAteague is from. So I had that connection with those people, but really I'm from Dublin. But because now all of this information is now available online, as Una Ming Cavanagh showed us, it's now easy enough for me to go online and find all those dictionaries, to remember the things I heard when I was young in West Kerry, when my grandmother, who had actually spent time on the Blasket Islands in 1912 and 13 and 14, and the Blasket Islands was this, so almost it's in a visionary place of a pure well of spring water of the old lore. So I was brought up, I mean, the Blaskets had been abandoned by the time I was born, it was abandoned in the 50s, but I was brought up in the 70s and the 80s, going around the houses of the old Blasket Islanders. So getting in that information, but then I was up in Dublin and had access to all of these old dictionaries, to all of these old sources of heritage. What was the other one that Una gave us? The Daigon, these texts. Yeah. So it's all available online now. And so my knowledge in the book seems really rich, but in fact, I'm more of a journalist. It's sort of superficial, and it's available to all of us now to access these. And then when we access them, to share them. Like a big theme today, is with Pat Murphy, a Pádraig Ó Monachú. He has enormous knowledge of the sea, which he is now putting on the archives. With Sean McAteague sharing everyday information on Twitter and Instagram with Bulletin. It's an exciting time, really, because the digital world is coming at the last shreds of when this information is still alive.
That's so powerful. Yeah. And I think events like this help people want to dive into those resources more, because as they exist just online, they are just like bits of information that are out there. But when they come alive in people like yourself and the other speakers on today's events, it comes through as knowledge, not just as information. So this has been amazing to see that. And since you just mentioned your grandmother, I just wanted to talk a little bit about ancestry and your connection to the language. So as people might realize now, this work that you're doing, as well as all the other amazing artists and researchers today, it's a daunting task. It's very intricate. It becomes a life passion, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's because of our ancestors and the influences that we've gotten over time through our family. So for me, like my passion doing this work comes from realizing that my grandmother grew up as an indigenous native speaker of Quechua in the Andes in Peru. And so, I wondered why she had stopped speaking that language over time. And on my father's side, my great-grandfather was a fluent speaker of Breton, another Celtic language. So all of those things have led to those realizations that those languages and the knowledge that comes with it have been lost in my family. Those are some of the underlying reasons that over time I've seen, okay, these are what are motivating factors for me. For you, in your book, you talk about your ancestor, the O'Rahilly. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about him and how the events of his life kind of set you on this trajectory and also through your grandmother too.
Yeah, so I suppose in some way, there'd be a small clique of us in Ireland who talk about the Irish language a lot, maybe almost to exhaustion, But what's really important when an event like this is happening based in New York, even if it's virtual, in the Irish Arts Centre, and particularly when one has someone like you, I've been looking at this topic from a different point of view because of your role in the Living Tongues Institute for Endangered Languages. you can take a step back. So you always think if people have languages, it's to do with an ancestor. And when you're in the middle of it, you don't think about that, what the lineage is. So it's fascinating for me to be thinking of the language almost through your eyes when you ask me questions. And when I realized then, so as you said, the O'Reilly was my great granduncle, and he was one of the leaders of the Easter Rising, of the fight for independence. He founded the Volunteers. So the Volunteers and then the IRB were the two armies that rose up in 1916 against the British. But the reason he did that was because he was following on from his own lineage of his great granduncle, like the 4 or 5 greats, Aegon O'Reilly, one of the last great poets, Gaelic poets from the old Bardic school. And what happened in Ireland was the poets took on the knowledge that the bards once had long ago. And so we have this sense of this continual tradition of ancient, that bardic, almost spiritual knowledge going into the poets. And Aegon O'Reilly was one of the last ones in the 16th, 17th century to have that lineage. So for the O'Reilly, who was called Michael O'Reilly, but a Celtic concept was always in the Gaelic clans, the eldest person called himself the or the. So he decided in the early 20th century, he was going to learn the Irish language and fight for independence from Britain so that they could retake over their own culture. And so that's why he brings my grandmother down to the sacred area. Every culture has its sacred area. So in Poland, it's Zakopane. In Quechua culture, there were places where the spiritual energy was strongest. And so they go to the Blasco Islands, they learn the Irish. My granny is 12 in 1912. She's 16 in 1916 when my great-granduncle sacrifices himself, going out, knowing he's going to die in 1916, because he knew the rising had to be a failure. The British were too strong, and he was an officer from the old 19th century mindset. So he was going to lead with his Irish tweed, just like I'm wearing today, and his sword out the front, from the front his men. He was going to be wiped down. He was going to be wiped out. And my grandmother saw this and decided she was going to devote, so he was devoting his life to the legacy of the last great Gaelic bards in the 16th century. And then my granny was going to devote her life to him, to the O'Reilly, her glorious uncle. And so I come along in 1970, and it's a direct lineage. I need to learn all of that knowledge, all of that words, all of that culture that my grandmother and the O'Reilly had taken on. Like, they had no Irish in 1912. They learnt it as part of a mission to re-Gaelicize, to retake back their own culture. And it's ridiculous. Look what I'm doing. I put out this book doing the exact same thing. We are little puppets being drawn by our ancestors, It's very interesting.
Sorry, that was so powerful. I'm just like, oh my God, it's amazing. And that lineage carries down in different ways. Sometimes you don't realize it, and sometimes it's there. It just comes through. So, oh gosh, it's so amazing. And I'm glad you put that into the book, because it creates a sense of the context from your family, and those. It's chilling. It gives me chills to hear about how that gets passed down. Here's a sort of a more ambiguous question that I wanted to ask about. In this book, you're giving the Irish people around the world, in Ireland and part of the diaspora too, it's an opportunity to connect with their heritage. And so I feel like when I was reading it, I felt like there was a tension between the familiarity of this knowledge and then to you, and then also the unfamiliarity to it, because so much of it has this otherworldliness to it. And I can relate to this too, as I'm, learning about my own Quechua heritage on my mother's side. Some of it makes me feel like a sense of being at home and rootedness, and I just feel so foreign to it sometimes. So I wanted to ask you about that. Do you feel that tension in your own work?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm now writing a second book. Well,
oh yes.
Actually, I've written a book of evocative words for children in Irish, which will come out next Christmas. But I'm now immersed in I suppose, a third book. But it's about landscape. And what I'm finding, every time you look at landscape in Ireland, and again, anytime you look at landscape all over the world, among native people, among people who've been in the same place for a long time, it is rooted, it is not just land, it is spiritual, it is rooted to myth. And so, Sean today, when he was talking about those constellations and the stars, he was constantly referring to myths. And even when he didn't say it, he said, well, that's a god or that's a goddess, or this is connected to a particular myth. Now, we don't have time to get into that, but that's dangerous territory. When you open up myths, myths, as we know, are endless. They're far bigger than reality. So let's say even like I talk in the book about Town Cliona, Cliona's wave, this supernatural wave that is both an audio wave and a sound wave, and is still to be heard in Glandore Harbour today. Or when Sean was talking about in Budach and how Budach is connected is the same, possibly the same as Manannán mac Lir, the sea god. So Manannán mac Lir was one of the gods who, well, Lir is the sea god of Lear of Shakespeare, is the original sea god. Manannán is his son. But in all the mythology, Manannán created Ireland, created the world, our world, Ireland, out of nothing. So you're getting into these vast concepts, and it's really hard to, how do you convey non-linear, circuitous, non-rational, vast, infinite thinking that is in any myth, in any ancient culture, in a modern world? You know, we just safely say, oh, Budach or the Milky Way is, or no, the Orion constellation is Manannán, and we don't go into the dangerous stuff. So, and I don't understand. I'm a citizen of the 20th and 21st century, so I would get swallowed whole. But I give the example often of the two words counter and alter. So counter is an easy word for all of us to understand. It means a district, a region, a place. Pamahoni se counter shop. I'm living in this district here, this region. But long ago, they understood there was a counter, and they had the opposite of counter. And the opposite of counter is alter. And if this is the counter, alter, and alter is the other world. Yeah, so there was only a thin veil between counter and alter, and people could easily slip from one to the other, from this world to the other world. And again, that's a concept you will find in so many native peoples all around the world, but it's a concept that isn't welcomed in the modern world and doesn't make us feel comfortable, and is very difficult to put into a dictionary or into a language class. But we need to be comfortable with that, you know, Irish people, and again, people all over the world, had beliefs beyond the rational, beyond the limited world. And we need to start feeling our way around into that. And for the Irish people particularly, you know, it was, I suppose, the Christian church tried to push us away from it. And luckily we kept it alive, you know, right up until Una and Sean have talked about all of this information in the folklore archives. That is all talking about this other world, that there's a word like cola, which is a leaf of a door or a gate, but also a threshold to the other world, as in Cult of Vrak, which was a magic door to supernatural dwellings in rocks or on a hillside. Or again, do you remember Pat Murphy talking about just seconds ago, about Cablu? And Cablu, the otherworldly voices you hear at night. Like when Patrick says something like that, you wonder how much do I dare to go in and ask him about what that actually means? They're big concepts, so there's definitely a tension.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that comes out time and time again. Another reason why I really recommend this book. One of my favorite quotes here is when you write, "A learner finding a word in a dictionary may have no sense of the multi-layered package of ideas and visions that trail back thousands of years, like the ion tail of a speeding meteor, but they still exist within a word." And when I read that, I was like, yes. Because people ask me at my job at Living Tongues, they're like, why do you do this? Why do you spend your life documenting these languages, you know, with this team that we built up doing this work? Sometimes it's in obscurity, you know? And I say, well, how are we going to throw away these languages that have existed for thousands and thousands of years that go back? Like, if you see them as resources and not as problems, the mindset shifts completely surrounding language. So I feel like your book is definitely contributing to this in a big way. Do we have time for a couple more questions? I think, hopefully. I wanted to get a little bit into Irish lore. I know it's dangerous territory. In your book, you refer to Irish heroes, historical figures, and you write about, which we talked about a little bit with Sean, Ireland's first poet and druid, a Mergin. Mm-hmm. Who, arriving from the sea and setting foot on the land, uttered this beautiful incantation. And you write, "A Mergin became the leader of the island, and his first act was to utter an incantation, summoning up the world that we intended to create here, and clarifying the interrelation between it and all the planes of existence, physical and spiritual." So I was wondering if you could read that in Irish, the segment that you have in your book.
Yeah. So as you say, Amergin, the great druid, the great leader, comes across the sea to be the founder of our people in Ireland. and he, you know, he almost drowns, and then this town Cliana, this magical wave, an offspring of Monnon, the sea god, washes him ashore. He stands up in Kerry, in County Kerry, and he says, and this is in Old Irish, but it's been passed down to us, you know, from, it claimed that this happened in 700 BC. Am gwe am wil, am thund trehem, am fuim mara, am dav shacht nirin, am sheg inail. And what he's saying there is, I am the wind on the sea. Am gwe am tuntren. I am the wave of the ocean. I am the roar of the sea. I am the stag of 7 tines. I am sheg inail. I am the hawk on the cliff. He's basically saying he is everything. Basically, it's I am. It's to be or not to be. He is summoning out of nothingness with words, manifesting the country. And that wasn't just something that Irish could do. It was something that ancient languages could do. First there was the word, and then the word was made flesh. The word, the human speaking something, imagining it into being. And now with with neurophysics, they're realizing quantum that actually we are all just our imagination. When we say something, when we think a picture, it manifests. And that is basically what he's claiming. I am a god, I am creating this. And all of us are gods, and we can, by saying these things, we bring them alive. It's potent, it's magical. It brings, goosebumps.
Absolutely, it is magical. And one last point I wanted to make just on that topic, I think that the reason why people, especially Gen Z, I think, are very hungry for this type of knowledge is because it helps us restore our connection to the land and the landscape and our knowledge about it. And I think this is very important right now in a time of climate change and environmental disasters. Just hearing about Amergan's ancient words about how he saw himself as part of the ecology itself, that is very powerful for us, and that's something that we need to regain. And language is one of the ways we can do it.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I'm realizing in the landscape book, it sort of comes through in this language book, but particularly in the landscape book, is it's all female. There's the female energy. The goddess is so key in all of this, as in so many native languages. There's nothing rare or unusual about Irish. It's just one of those old cultures and old languages. And like there's that the Cailleach figure, the great witch, the great earth goddess who creates the winter, who creates the soil, who says she remembers a time when the Atlantic had a forest in the middle of it. And like almost talking about those supercontinent Pangaea, the time of the pre-continent before the landmasses had torn asunder. There is deep knowledge, and we need to just unpick it. And it's very hard to go into it with an academic or rational mind. We need to wade into it and feel our way. And know sometimes we will have got things too wrong and we will have guessed too much, but hope that our ancestors might guide us deeper. And as you say, it does feed us, it does nourish us. We are all feeling so broken at the moment. We're feeling so lost and disconnected. And any old language connected to any people who've been in the one place for long enough will begin to nourish and feed us.
So true. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for this vibrant conversation. I am gonna jump in here to get a few questions from the audience, just so we don't run out of time here. If you're just joining us, at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you will see a little box that says Q&A. If you click on that and type in a question and press return, then we will receive them now. And it looks like we already have a few questions here. And the first is actually in relation to the beginning of the conversation. What are some of the particular herbs that, when blistered by the sun, confer inspiration? As an herbalist and a poet, this person says it's a special interest to them. So a little off topic, but any of those particular herbs?
No, so the two things that I get asked most since the book came out is knowledge about the stars and knowledge about the herbal remedies. And they're both things that are, so much of it is lost. There's a woman who's coming out, she's a lecturer in UCC on herbalists and folklore, and she has a book coming out in September, actually, that's going to have some of that information. But because there's a lot of words for herbs in the folklore, but because I didn't understand them, I didn't understand the references. And so what we need is women, ideally, to go back into his culture and to ask the last people, the sort of medicine women. There's a great woman in Donegal who has great herbal knowledge about the different plants on the bogs in Donegal. But really, most of this has not been collected. Neil McQuitter's book of Irish Wildflowers is good, but it's sort of, you know, it doesn't go into detail about the herbal remedies. So I'm afraid I don't know. The information is out there. Well, some of it is virtually out there, and people are beginning to collect it up.
Yes, and on that topic, it's very important for women also to do this type of work. Traditionally in ethnography, anthropology, and linguistics, these are all fields that were dominated by men, you know, up until a few decades ago. And a lot of the knowledge is held by women who are wisdom keepers in so many different indigenous cultures around the world. And when I worked in the Amazon, unfortunately, I had no ethnobotany background whatsoever. So I would speak with women, and they would be telling me all the names of the plants, and it was just like, you know, I was blind to it because I didn't know all the different types of plants and their species and their usages. But it was very important because some of the women there had told me, oh, no one has ever asked me these questions, you know. The men, you know, there's gender divides too. And so you have to be careful with who you ask what, when, at what time. So there's so much more work there to be done working with elder women.
Wonderful. There's some questions here. So I guess on that topic, with your work with Quechua, Ana Luisa, because you mentioned, I know that you were inspired by your grandmother and Monkin by your grandmother there. Did when you're reading the book, were there any connections that you found just in terms of language and themes?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I kept thinking, gosh, when the restrictions lift and the borders open again, like there's so many places I want to go. And one of them is this pilgrimage that my grandmother used to take when she was young. And it was to see an ancestral figure in the Andes they called La Virgen de Chapi. And so every time I see her in the last few years, she would tell me, okay, this is what I used to do. And they would go on this long, basically hike in the Andes, her and her mother and her sisters. And they did this every year. And, you know, I tried to find more information about, you know, the lore surrounding that. And I haven't found too much yet, just from online, but probably next time I'm in Peru, I'll probably be able to find more. I just feel like, you know, I just want to trek that trail, you know, and I got that feeling when I was reading your book too, Monk, and I was just like, oh, you know, I'm sure people will want to go to these specific regions and find out more for themselves. Yeah.
And it looks like a couple of people have shared in the chat here, for the person that had the question about herbs, a link to an Irish woman working on herbs here, and then also Sean Makatihi has put Flora of the Quercadwiva book here on botany and associated folklore from West Kerry.
That's a great book. Flora Quercadwiva is a gorgeous book, which is, you know, particularly focused on all the plants in that area of West Kerry. And Rosarie Kingston is the woman, the lecturer in UCC, who's coming out with a book on the whole history of herbal folklore in Ireland. So I'm eager to read that. That should be out in September. But as you say, like as Ana Luisa says, it is so focused. All of our folklore collectors, you know, were men. And even when they were going to the Great Women, they were asking women, but they wouldn't have thought to ask about gender issues or women's issues or sexual issues or all of that vast knowledge of herbs. So it's something that hopefully, you know, it is endangered, and hopefully it isn't all being lost. Like, yeah, mushroom knowledge, I can't find anything about that, and it must be somewhere.
Yeah, great. So we just have a few more minutes left, so if you have any last pressing questions, you want to put them into the Q&A box here. I also just wanted to mention that if you are in the US and you are looking to get a copy of the book, 32 Words for Field, I highly recommend you do. I will, in a moment, I'm going to also put into the chat information about the book depository, which is an easy way to access the book, to get the book shipped to the US. I would also mention, I know that there are a lot of people of different learning levels, beginners to advanced, and I would just say that I am a total beginner and I loved the book. I thought it was fascinating and actually kind of invigorated me and excited me to keep learning. So I just wanted to share that I think that there is information for advanced learners, there's fascinating information, and for beginners it is very accessible as well. And I want to...
And every day still, you know, for the next, well, since January, I've been posting a C word every day on Twitter and on Instagram at manchán.magan, which I'll share there. And then I've also, from now, I think in about a month's time, I'm going to move on from words from C words to words from 32 words. And I'll keep on posting those for months, I suppose, until I get bored.
Wonderful. Ana Luisa, I wanted to just to give you the mic, sort of to mention anything around the Living Tongues Institute and anything to watch out for in terms of.
Oh, sure. I'll put our website here in case anyone wants to learn more. One of the many things we do is we publish living dictionaries, so you can find that link on our website. And those are online dictionaries with text and audio recordings and images and soon to be videos related to endangered languages around the world. And so we hope that these resources over time will become sort of like mini encyclopedias for many languages. Irish, thankfully, has such a deep tradition of documentation, but there's still, as you can see, so much work to be done with Irish. And so many of the other languages we work with at Living Tongues have been barely documented at all. So there's it's a growing field. There's a lot of people interested in studying linguistics. So if you have an interest in language, I urge you to study, if you're in college right now, try taking a linguistics course. Maybe you never heard of that before, and maybe you want to see if you like it. And also, I just wanted to leave you all with one thought, which is you don't have to be an academic, as Manchán said, to do this work. You could integrate your own heritage within your art or multimedia or digital world, or basically whatever field you're in, you can help integrate it, whether it's in textiles or fashion, or other modes of interest. So I really encourage everyone, whether you're an academic or not, to pursue knowledge of your ancestral languages.
Yeah.
Great. And I know that we just put in, or I just saw here that, oh, thank you. Sorry. So you put in Manchán's website, which is great. I was going to say that Manchán, you're doing 7 million things all of the time, I think. So probably hard to put one thing down, but the website seems like a good way to probably keep track of things. Did you want to add anything else for us to?
Just that I'd agree with Ana Luisa. It's just about going to these people. Like, as I said, so many of the fishermen I asked, first they said, no one's ever asked me these questions. So as Ana Luisa says, we need to ask the textile people, the dyers, the farmers, every level, the midwives. And they're only too happy. They're sitting often, they're in their late 60s or 70s or 80s. Nobody's asking these questions. And if one asks politely and sits for a cup of tea, it was like I have amassed an enormous wealth of words from the sea, and it looks like I've done something, a lot of work. I haven't. Where Sean McAteague is actually in the archives digging through old manuscripts to get the. I just asked 6 fishermen, and I got this slew of words. They have the words. They're willing and able and eager to share them, as long as you don't annoy them, But now is the time, and it is such fulfilling work to get rooted into our past, into our culture, to realize who we are again.
Well, thank you again, Ana Luisa Daigneault, and a big thank you to Manchán Magan for being with us all afternoon, and to all of our amazing panelists and artists that joined us today. Nelnie Cronin, Una Ming Kavanagh, Padraig O'Murphy, and Sean McAteague. I just wanted to say a thank you to Irish Arts Centre staff, in particular Max Smith, Grace Schultz, and Kestra Wolgamuth for your work on today's event, and thank you all for joining us.